You want to make some picks on your favorite sports? Check out Underdog's Fantasy Pick'em game, where you can pick higher or lower on between 2 to 8 players and can win up to 325 times your entry by using code Niners when you sign up. And you'll get $1,000 bonus cash and a free pick.
From the alley-oops at Keysar to the glory days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way. From off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. Time to talk about the biggest positional needs for the San Francisco 49ers in 2025. And I don't know how you feel about it, but 49ers definitely have some needs. And there are some positions that everyone's talking about that the 49ers need to address in the upcoming draft, but also free agency. And of course, I've been going through the process of the offseason and how the 49ers approach it. We talked about the exit interviews and then Kyle Shanahan and the coaching hires, and he's been doing his interviews. And of course, there's been all kinds of news about that. Robert Saleh potentially being the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL. And there's a lot of hoopla coming from that. But while that is going on, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan are having meetings, and Kyle Shanahan's had meetings with the coaches, position coaches, to determine who's going to be on the 49ers in 2025. Are some of these guys going to be brought back? You know, there's some free agents at key positions. Are the 49ers going to bring them back? Or do they have an heir apparent that's ready to step up that the position coaches and Kyle Shanahan believe are ready to step in and make a significant impact? Or do you need to go out in free agency? The other thing you're going to do is you're going to talk to your pro scouts. Which guys fit our system? Which guys are available? And then you're also going to talk to your collegiate scouts. And you're going to say, hey, what is this draft really high on? Is there a lot of players at this position or that position? You can determine which ones need to be addressed in free agency, which ones need to be addressed in the draft. All the while, you've also got to talk to Parag Marathi and figure out if financially it makes sense, because you're still working on new contracts for guys like Brock Purdy, potentially George Kittle, who's going in the last year of his contract, and maybe even Fred Warner. So there's a lot of moving parts, but one of the first things you do is figure out what positional needs you have. Either a player's leaving or you need to get better at the position. Because sometimes during a season, you just figure out that position's not good enough. We're not playing good enough there, and it's starting to hurt our football team. And if that is the case, you need to make something happen. You either need to bring someone in through free agency or the draft that's going to be better than the current player you have, because it's about the sum of all parts. It's not about one player or the other. You have to make sure everyone can consistently play together. So for the 49ers, that's the process they're going through, and that's the process I've been going through on the channel. We've been taking it stage by stage by stage. And right now, we're trying to build towards what are the needs for the 49ers at each position. We're going to put them in order. We're going to count them down. And then that way, when we start looking at free agency, we can go position by position of what the 49ers need and talk about real fits, people that fit the 49ers program. Now, it's going to be a little bit more difficult when it comes to defense right now because the defensive coordinator is not known. But maybe by the time I get there, the defensive coordinator will be known. We'll have a really clear path for what he wants to do with this football team. So this is going to be a fun process. I'm really looking forward to it. Hope you guys all are as well. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Really appreciate it. If you're listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. And if you're going to bet with Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC, Bet Online is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, Bet Online has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. So for me, it goes to philosophy, and I'm going to talk from the 49ers point of view. This isn't going to be as much my point of view as how I think the 49ers point of view is on things. So you're going to get a clear thought process on what I think about current players they have, current positional needs from the way that they've done this historically. And the way that they address certain positions is going to be put out there in the order at which I go through this. So it's going to be interesting. I want to know what you think, so let me know in the comment section if you agree, you disagree with the order. Let me know what your order would be. I love to hear it because you always want to listen to different perspectives because it could give you some keen insight into something you're missing. So please go ahead and let me know. But number one for me in positional needs, and this is just what I think the 49ers do, what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have done since they got here in 2017, is they've always addressed this position and made it a main focal point, and that is defensive tackle. And John Lynch has talked deeply about what he thought Warren Sapp meant to his Tampa Bay Buccaneers teams when he played there, and the fact that it really helped everyone else on the team when you had a force on the interior like that. You look at the way the 49ers built their football team, and by the time you got to 2019, they had game wreckers who were all first-round picks at pretty much every starting position along the defensive line. You had Nick Bosa, first-round pick. Dee Ford, first-round pick. Buckner, first-round pick. Armstead, first-round pick. Solomon Thomas, first-round pick. You were loaded beyond loaded when it came to that 2019 defensive line. You can't replicate that again because some of those guys came from a previous regime. You wouldn't normally spend that much capital on defensive line. But the 49ers need to address defensive line in a big way. And part of the reason is you've lost Eric Armstead now. Armstead moved on last season, didn't want to take less money, and he got a deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars to go play there. And so the 49ers came into the season trading for Malik Collins last season and adding a good football player. Malik Collins is a very good football player. But Javon Hargrave got hurt in week 3. And now Javon Hargrave's not even going to be a part of the San Francisco 49ers in 2025, it appears. Now, John Lynch talked about the fact he's a post-June 1 cut. He's going to be able to negotiate with everyone when the new league year starts March 12th, and potentially he could come back to San Francisco if it all worked out. I don't think that's a realistic possibility. I think somebody's going to be willing to pay Javon Hargrave a decent amount of money. The 49ers couldn't pay him $19 million, so they let him go. But he's going to get something out on the open market that exceeds what the 49ers want to pay Javon Hargrave. So you have a big hole when it comes to starting defensive tackle, because when you look at the players that are behind them, Jordan Elliott is not a starting defensive tackle in the NFL. Solid rotational piece. Can come in, give you 20 snaps a game, very impactful snaps, probably when he's the best because he's full of energy and ready to penetrate and get in there and make plays. Then you look behind and you got a young player that you like in Evan Anderson, but he's not a starting defensive tackle in the NFL. He's a rotational piece. You look at Kalia Davis, he's not a starting defensive tackle. We're all hoping he was going to develop into a starting defensive tackle, but he's not there yet. So he is not going to be the guy. So what you have is Malik Collins, who's a starting caliber defensive tackle, and 3 rotational pieces. You need to get better at the position. You need to bring in a bona fide stud to start next to Malik Collins. I think it needs to be addressed during free agency. You need to go get a DJ Jones or a Poona Ford or somebody else. We'll go through the list as we continue down this path. But somebody needs to step in there next to Malik Collins and be formidable. And I don't think you stop there. I think you also look at the draft to get better. I think if you could improve on Jordan Elliott or Kalia Davis or Evan Anderson, you completely do. Because it's about getting better and better. And there are players in the draft and players in free agency that are better than the players we named. But that is the number one positional need for the San Francisco 49ers is defensive tackle. They have to get better. Run offenses were able to move the football against them consistently. They weren't getting the penetration and pressure up the middle that they normally got. So this is going to be something the 49ers have to address. I think it's a position they will address, and I think it's their number one positional need on their team, defensive tackle. So they got to get better, and they got to get better fast. It doesn't matter who the defensive coordinator is. That's going to be the main objective, is getting better at defensive tackle. Now, the second on my list is not offensive line, which I think will surprise some people because they know we have a hole at left guard, and there's other positions along the offensive line we need to get better at. But I see a glaring need if number 57 doesn't come back in free agency. And of course, I'm talking about Dre Greenlaw. If Greenlaw doesn't come back to San Francisco, the linebacker room is a really big need. Because as much as I like D. Winters, and I do, he's not ready to start. Because when you look at who D. Winters is compared to Dre Greenlaw, there is a huge drop-off between Dre and D. D. Winters is still getting his feet underneath him, even after 2 seasons in the NFL. I think by the time we get to the end of his contract, he'll probably be ready to start. But Dre Greenlaw, he is not. Dre Greenlaw is a top 10 linebacker in this league. And when him and Fred Warner play together, they're two of the best. It's one of the best tandems, if not the best tandem in the entire league. And I think it was on display last year. We saw it in the Super Bowl when he got hurt. The game completely flipped. Then you see him this year. He comes in, and all of a sudden this defense can absolutely stop the run. He's flying around making tackles. This team needs Dre Greenlaw. And if he's not there, there's a huge hole. And it's not just that, but the cabinet is bare. You look at that linebacker room. Jalen Graham got cut last season. He came back, but he was on the practice squad to start. That doesn't exactly scream future starter for this football team. Tatum Bethune was a 7th-round pick, and even though I like Tatum Bethune, he's good against the run. He's got a lot of room to improve when it comes to playing against the pass, so he needs to get better. Flanagan Fowles has been brought back for special teams reason. It's probably time to move on from Flanagan Fowles. He's not good enough when it comes to playing linebacker consistently, and that's something they need to make sure they get better at. So Dre Greenlaw being there, they need to get a lot better for the starter, and then it also needs to get better for the depth as well. So it's going to be huge. If they bring Dre Greenlaw back, your starters are set. D. Winters is a good third linebacker for your football team. He can run, he can tackle. You feel like you can stop the run with that 3-man group. If Dre Greenlaw doesn't come back, the 49ers need to address it in free agency and in the draft. So it is going to be a position of need in a big way, and that's a big hole if Dre Greenlaw's not playing. If he's playing, you're going to be okay. If he's not, you're going to be in a world of hurt. That's why it's number 2 on my list. Number 3, we're still not getting the offensive line. And you can scream at me if you want, but the next guy accounts for points. And he caused the 49ers not just to lose points, he also helped them lose field position and lose games, and that is Jake Moody. And I think this is a position of need for the 49ers. They need to bring in somebody to compete with Jake Moody. And most people are waiting for the 49ers just to outright cut Jake Moody and move on. I don't think the 49ers are going to do that. They don't exactly need to admit that it's over yet, because Jake Moody did have some things that probably went against him this season. Number 1, he got hurt. That definitely didn't help. He was 12 of 13 until he sprained his ankle. Now, it's his fault he sprained his ankle because it was a bad kick on the kickoff and he had to go cover. So it's his own fault. But it does play a factor potentially into him missing kicks. Number 2, he did get a different holder halfway through the year as Pat O'Donnell took over for Mitch Wisnowski. And so that could have played a factor as well. But the 49ers don't have to make a decision because Jake Moody can just compete with somebody in training camp. That's what the 49ers need to do. They need to find somebody, whether it's a free agent they bring in, an Andres Carlson, who they had last year for a little bit, maybe a Matthew Wright, who got hurt himself when he was filling in for the 49ers, or even somebody else. And I would love to see somebody with a stronger leg than the 2 guys I brought up come in and compete with Moody. Because if Moody can play up to his physical traits ability, he's one of the better kickers in the league. We've seen him hit a 57-yarder in the Super Bowl. That's impressive. The problem is he's got the yips. He's in his head. Now, a new special teams coach is probably going to want to make a decision on Jake Moody, but it would be a lot better if you got to see him in training camp compete. So I think that's something the 49ers need to do and need to address because, like I said, you were losing points, you were losing field position, and ultimately you were losing games because of Jake Moody. Can't allow that to happen. You need to bring somebody in that can be more consistent. And so I think they will have competition. And when it comes to Mitch Wishnowsky, I kind of put him in here with the kicker because I don't know what his back is like. And if the medical checks out and he's going to be healthy, then it's no harm, no foul. When he's healthy, he kicks really good. Just a year or two ago, he had a really good season, top 5 in the league. So he has the ability. But if the back is going to be something that lingers, the 49ers need to address punter as well. You can't lose field position because your punter is not getting it done. So that is another interesting one. Kicker and punter, number 3 for me. Bring competition for Moody. He's costing you. Number 4, we get to the offensive line, and there's a hole at left guard. Aaron Banks is looking like he's going to get $8 million on the open market. That's projected. And so you do have a spot where you're going to have to fill. I don't see the 49ers paying him $8 million. And I know some people are saying, yeah, 49ers might pay him $8 million. I don't see it. They weren't willing to pay Laken Tomlinson, and he was playing at a Pro Bowl caliber level when he left and went to New York. I don't see them paying Aaron Banks because the season just wasn't that good. He didn't look healthy. He was moving a little bit slower. He was losing a lot of the bend that he normally had. And I think that it was really affecting him. The injuries are starting to mount. So finding another player that could fit in is what they need to do. Now, free agent Ben Barch, they could bring him back, and he could help fill that role. Nick Zakelj played pretty good over the last 2 games. I think he'll be in the mix. And then you got Spencer Burford, who started a lot of games at right guard in his rookie season. So they have some options, but I think it's something they have to address. And so it's a big hole for them to fill. Now, it could be as simple as Coach Chris Foerster says, you know what? Ben Barch is ready. And I talked about this earlier, is you have to deem if there's an heir apparent ready to step in. When Laken Tomlinson moved on, Aaron Banks was the heir apparent. They're ready to plug and play and ready to go. Is Ben Barch that guy? And if so, you have to bring him back in free agency. Maybe it's Spencer Burford. Burford is the most talented, according to Foerster. He even said that Burford was more talented than Dominic Pooney, who is a stalwart at right guard. I mean, the guy is fantastic. And I think what it is when you look at Burford, he's more physically talented than any of those guys. He runs faster, he's bigger, he's more physical, he's stronger, he's got an attitude to him. The problem is he's not consistent. And Dominic Pooney has been consistent over and over and over. But if Burford could find that consistency, well, then he could be the left guard of the future. But I do think the 49ers have some guys there where the cupboard is bare at linebacker, and the cupboard is not completely bare, but of starters, it's bare when it comes to defensive tackle. I don't think it's bare when it comes to guard. I think there's a few options there that could start if the 49ers felt like they improved enough. I think Barch did look like he was better. I do think Zakelj did as well. And we've seen Burford over the years be a pretty good option. So that is number 4 on the list, left guard. Number 5 on the list, center. And this is a situation where we don't have an opening. In fact, Jake Moody was the first that it wasn't a real opening. But this one is the other one that's not an opening. You just need to get better at the position. Because when you look at the San Francisco 49ers, center has been a problem over the last couple seasons. And I think people thought consistency for Jake Brendel would just get better. But unfortunately, he hasn't. Jake Brendel just hasn't gotten better. And you're getting good performance followed by mediocre performance. And that is not what you need. Consistency at center. And the reason that I put this in the top 5, even though we have a player in place that started a lot of football games for this team, is Kyle Shanahan's invested in this position before. Weston Richburg was a guy that he invested heavily in. They continue to bring in Alex Mack and guys who had been good centers, veteran centers around the league, until Jake Brendel. That's when they decided to go with more of a low-cost option as they paid Trent Williams, and they tried to kind of skim on everybody else. But it might be time to return to form and pay somebody to play center. You've probably heard people talking about free agent Drew Dahlman, and I'm going to do a little bit more work on him before we ever go ahead and talk about those free agents the 49ers might sign if they fit the system. So there are options out there in free agency. There will be options in the draft. Now, I will say this, because every year 49er fans want the 49ers to draft a center in the draft. I think the 49ers prefer a veteran center over a young rookie center. So even if they drafted someone, I don't expect that player to be able to play. It would take a very unique, special player to step in. They didn't even expect Dominic Pooney to step in year one and play. So I do think the veteran route is probably the most obvious. The other option could be, there's two guys on this football team, could be option. Number one, Nick Zakelj. He looked pretty good in training camp. He looked good down the stretch playing left guard. And I will say this, center has been a better position for him in training camp in the preseason than left guard. Number two, Dominic Pooney. I saw it from the first time I watched him, and I brought this up with everyone I seen last year. I said he could play guard and he could play center. They could potentially move him there. I think he would be a stud guard for the next several years. But I think if they moved him to center, he would do a really good job there too. He's a special talent and a very intelligent player. So I like that option too. But center needs to be something that they address for sure. Number 6, safety. They've got a huge hole. Jair Brown is not the answer behind Talanoa Hufanga. We're set with Malik Mustafa. Mustafa showed enough that as long as he takes another step forward, he's going to be a very good safety for the 49ers for a few years. But with Talanoa Hufanga being gone potentially, you have a hole. And if they bring Hufanga back, then the hole goes to we just need to add depth, somebody to compete with George Odom and Jair Brown, because eventually we need somebody that can step in and start at the position when Hufanga ultimately moves on. But I think the position is weaker now than I thought it was last season. And so it's been a position that's gotten weaker and weaker over the last couple years. It was a couple years ago, you had Hufanga, you had Tashawn Gibson, stud starters, and you had Jair Brown, a young player that everyone liked, and then the special teams guy, George Odom. This season that came up, there was no Tashawn Gibson to start the season, but everyone was optimistic about Jair Brown. Then he just didn't live up to expectations. So 49ers need to address it. And if Hufanga does move on in free agency, maybe they'll go and talk to Julian Blackmon, who they tried to bring in last season, and potentially get him to come in and start. But I think if Hufanga leaves, they need to address safety position in free agency. They need a veteran. They can't go into the year next year with it being Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa and hoping that a young rookie is going to be able to step in and compete. I think that would make this defense a lot weaker on the back end. So I think that this is a big one for the 49ers and a position that could easily have been moved above center if you really look at it. But I just think that Jake Brendel's hurt the 49ers offense enough that I was willing to keep it that way. Number 7, tight end. And it's not the starter. We're getting to positions right where it's not the starter, it's the backup. George Kittle is still the number 1 tight end in the NFL, in my opinion. He's an all-pro, and I thought he had just a tremendous season. And I know Brock Bowers had a great year as well, and I don't want to take anything away from him. But the blocking, the receiving, everything about George Kittle's great. The problem is behind him. And Eric Saubert needed to be tight end 3, and he was tight end 2. And I know a lot of people were preaching how great he was at training camp. He was good. He wasn't great. And I said consistently from the beginning, that was my belief. And then they went Jake Tunges, which really shocked me as the 3rd tight end. I did not have him making the football team. I don't think he should have made the football team. And they went that direction. Tunges really didn't do anything during the season, enough so that Brandon Willis had to come up and play a lot of those snaps blocking. I think they need to get better at the position, and they need to get better real bad. And so this is a position I think they should address in free agency. And one of my guys, if you've been around the channel for a while, you know that since the draft a while back, I've wanted Tommy Tremble, tight end, formerly of Notre Dame, who has been with the Carolina Panthers. Then during the trade deadline, I was saying, hey, we should go ahead and get Tommy Tremble, and they need to bring him in. And so now that's something I still believe. I'm sure there's other tight ends I could talk about as well, and we'll get into those when we get into more about free agency. But the 49ers, Chris Verster, talked about the fact that they really felt the effects of losing Charlie Warner, and Saubert is not a good enough blocker. They need a elite blocker behind George Kittle, and they've got to address that tight end position. They got to address it in a big way this season. The starter is great, but I would say the rest of the depth is pretty much a mess. It didn't work out with Cameron Latu or Brayden Willis. They need to go a different direction. So they're going to have to figure it out. That is for sure, because it's just not working out at tight end. Address it in free agency, address it in the draft, get yourself some good players, and rebuild that group behind George Kittle. So we're going to switch it up just a little bit, change a direction real quick. I want to talk to you about Underdog Fantasy. Right now, you can do the higher lower game and use the promo code Niners and get up to $1,000 cash and a free pick. And I'm going to talk about the players that I picked for this week in the divisional round of the playoffs. I went Saquon Barkley higher than 126.5 yards from scrimmage. That's rush and receiving yards. I think he's going to have a big game this week in the playoffs. I think he's just going to be able to get some things done. He's just been so good this season that I like that for Saquon Barkley. I have Lamar Jackson going higher than 0.5 rushing touchdown, so I think he's going to get a touchdown in this game on the ground. And so that is the one I'm going with higher against the Buffalo Bills. And then his counterpart, Josh Allen, I have him going higher than 240.5 passing yards. So these are just 3 easy picks that I made. You can play as well. When you sign up with Underdog, just use the promo code Niners, and you can make your picks and see what you can do in this week's divisional round matchups. Lots of other cool stuff there as well that you can play through Underdog Fantasy. And hey, go check it out. I'm getting into it, enjoying it, and maybe you will too. Now back to the list. We went through the first 7. Now number 8, cornerback. And you might say, hey, we got Demo, we got Renardo. But in a league that plays so much nickel, you have to have a third cornerback, because sub packages 70% of the time that put you in nickel with 3 wide receiver sets, you need a third cornerback. Well, Tavarius Ward is going to be gone. Isaac Yedem's a free agent. Rock Yassine's a free agent. And Darrell Luter Jr. hasn't really developed into the player that you were hoping. Nick McLeod's going to be a free agent. You brought him in during the season. So you need to address the third cornerback. And so I think that that's a hole for this football team. The reason I have it lower on the list is because I do think they could bring back Nick McLeod or Isaac Yedem and fill that hole, and it wouldn't kill this football team. So I don't see it as big a hole as some of the other positions that have really hurt the 49ers. So I think they can figure this thing out. But just like tight end, the depth behind those 2 guys definitely needs to be addressed. I think they need to address it in free agency. I have a couple of names that I'll bring up on a later episode that I'm looking for the 49ers to address cornerback with. Second of all, they need to make sure they continue to bring in young players to compete. It's time to see if Darrell Luter Jr. is that guy, or if he's an Ambry Thomas type player that you have to move on from. 49ers got it right with Renardo Green. They need to get it right again in this one. Number 9, swing tackle. I think it's time for the 49ers to bring back Jalen Moore. But right now, that's the thing. There's no other swing tackle on this football team. I don't think Spencer Burford can be swing tackle. Yes, they got some other guys, that they potentially could bring in, a guy like Charlie Heck. But I don't think that that's the answer when it comes to swing tackle. I think it needs to be Jalen Moore or somebody like Jalen Moore. So it's a position the 49ers need to address in the offseason. Could be as simple as Chris First and says, hey, yeah, let's bring back Jalen Moore, and they're able to work out a contract. But I'm always nervous about somebody around the league seeing what Jalen Moore did at left tackle in place of Trent Williams and saying, you know what, he could play right tackle for us as a starter and go ahead and get it there. So we'll see if the 49ers financially can afford Jalen Moore, but the hope is that they can bring him back as a swing tackle, because I thought he did a really good job this season. Number 10 is edge. You have 3 edge defenders right now that you feel really confident in. Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos. Hopefully those guys stay healthy and have a better season. Especially Gross-Matos. Injuries definitely were a problem for him. But with 3 being deep, you've got a couple of guys maybe that you still like potentially. You got Robert Beal Jr. got better against the run. Needs to get better rushing the passer, which everyone thought it was going to be the flip. He was going to be a really good pass rusher and need to work on stopping the run, but it's been the inverse. Then you also got Sam Okuwandu, who came on the scene, who was a lot better at rushing the passer than setting the edge against the run. not bad, but it felt like he hit a little bit of a wall as the season went on as far as conditioning. I'm sure he'll get better at that, but the 49ers are happy with him. Then you got Drake Jackson potentially coming back. Who knows what you're going to get from that guy? But I think it could be the way the 49ers are drafting. It's never a bad idea to address defensive tackle and edge in every draft. Bring somebody in that can compete. And if the 49ers could get a blue chipper at pick 11 or 43, you 100% do it. That way you got a solid 4-man rotation this season. And then when Floyd and Gross-Matos move on, you have a guy ready to step in and take over. So edge, another spot. I don't expect it to be addressed in free agency. I expect it to be addressed in the draft. Now, the only way it could be is if somebody is not getting the market they want, and so they say to the 49ers, I'll come in, because they know that they could get a huge contract on the open market. All you have to do is look at some of the guys that did it. Samson Ebukam and others. It's a Charles Amenahu. So there's an opportunity there. Number 11, quarterback. And it's not the starter. He's going to get a new contract extension during the offseason. But Joshua Dobbs and Brandon Allen are going to be free agents. So Joshua Dobbs, I've talked about this a little bit on the Red and Bold show with Mark Adams on Wednesday. I think Josh Dobbs might come back and compete for that backup role. I think he likes it in San Francisco. But I think it's important for the 49ers to move on from Brandon Allen and bring in some guys, or a guy that has been towards the top of the draft, that has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, that feels like he still has the ability to start and can come in and push Brock Purdy. Because I think Brock Purdy's been better when he's been pushed. 2022, he just had to push to make the football team. 2023, he had to overcome an injury and beat out Sam Darnold and Trey Lance, who were both number 3 overall picks in their respective drafts. I think he needs that again. And I think there's a couple guys out there, and I'll go ahead and tell you who I think are a couple guys, and there's more that I'll bring up in a future episode. But Zach Wilson, number 1. Zach Wilson, Kyle Shanahan, and the 49ers studied him extensively in the Trey Lance draft. He was drafted 1 pick ahead of Trey Lance. There's a lot of people that believe that if the Jets would have went another direction, it would have been Zach Wilson instead of Trey Lance. So 49ers definitely like him. He likes San Francisco. He fits the scheme. He's played in a version of it, has a strong arm, athletic ability, and this could be the reclamation project for the 49ers. And Zach Wilson's seen what happened with Sam Darnold, and he might be looking at it like, hey, I could be that guy, because there could be an opportunity if something happens to Brock Purdy that I could get in there and play on a really good football team. And everyone believes that he still has a chance. He's still 25 years old, still a young player. The other one is Daniel Jones, who's been with the Minnesota Vikings. He's going to be a free agent. Another guy picked way up high in the draft who has a lot of physical traits. And he came down to Minnesota and San Francisco for his decision when it came to signing as a quarterback. So the 49ers are in play. So 2 guys right there, Daniel Jones, Zach Wilson, who could be reclamation projects, but also very talented, very good sized players that could come in and compete with Brock Purdy and push him to be a little bit better. At wide receiver, I don't think it's a huge need. Yes, Brandon Ayuk probably will miss the first part of the season, but you're going to have Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Deebo Samuel, and Jacob Cowing, who should be a lot better in his sophomore season. And then you have a couple of guys on your practice squad that you can possibly have come in and compete early. Russell Gage, who's been with Kyle Shanahan before. Isaiah Hodgins, who was a great signing, I feel. And you'll probably still address it in the draft, maybe a cheaper player in free agency. And who knows? Maybe the 49ers will find a guy that's willing to take a little bit less that can come in and play the X position while Brandon Ayuk is recovering. We'll see what happens there, but I don't think it's a big priority for the 49ers at the wide receiver position. I think they'll probably take one in the draft, but I don't think it'll be in the first 3 rounds. I think it'll be later. And so it becomes a non-worry. And then running back. You have Christian McCaffrey. As of right now, you have Jordan Mason as a restricted free agent. Now, if Mason moves on, it could change positional need. That's for sure. And, of course, I've talked about him being traded. But then you got Isaac Guerrero. And so you've got those 3 guys. I think the 49ers feel pretty comfortable with that running back room. And I think we've seen now that they can definitely find guys in the draft, find guys in free agency, plug and play. And I think there's some guys around the league that the 49ers could bring in. We've seen what they did with Patrick Taylor. We've seen what they've done with a guy like Jeff Wilson Jr. So I think running back is a a interesting spot. But I think with Bobby Turner and Kyle Shanahan, they can figure it out and find the guy that fits. So I definitely think the 49ers, can figure this thing out. And now we've went through the positional needs for the 49ers. I'm curious what you guys think. Let me know where I got it right, where I got it wrong. And we'll continue to see. But now we'll start working through the positions about the free agents that are available. Once we go through free agency, more draft stuff. I've been doing a little bit of draft stuff. I'm going to put some of my draft stuff over on Patreon as I start breaking down these players a little bit more. But all that stuff's going to be coming up pretty soon. So I hope you guys will all be coming through on the channel. It's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, my top 5, again, positional needs. Number 1, defensive tackle. Number 2, linebacker. Number 3, kicker. Number 4, left guard. And number 5, center. So they've got to address some spots. They're going to have to spend a little money. They're going to have to address it in the draft as well. But they can definitely do it. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network. Please give it a 5-star rating. This episode was brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.